Well, hello, everybody. It's Congressman Jamie Raskin coming to you live from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. We're here in the parking lot of the Chevy Chase Public Library. I want to welcome my friends on the bus with Demand Justice, Planned Parenthood, and Citizens United, and a bunch of other groups who have been traveling around the country to raise an alarm about what's taken place with the Supreme Court and the erosion of our freedoms and civil rights and civil liberties on the Supreme Court and the enshrinement of corporate power by this court. And so, I was thinking on the way over here about just some of the worst decisions of the Roberts Court that have really cut into the freedoms of the people. Everybody knows that we are approaching the first anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which overturned more than a half century of Supreme Court precedent upholding the right of women to choose to obtain an abortion in consultation with their physicians. And the court overturned that and have now basically turned the country into those that are free choice states and those that are authoritarian theocratic states where politicians try to dictate to women what their choices will be over their lives, their careers, their families, and their health care. But Dobbs is just really an expression of what's been taking place on the Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln talked about how somebody asked him about, well, what was the relationship between democracy and the Constitution and freedom and the Declaration of Independence? And he said, the Constitution is like the beautiful silver platter. Constitutional democracy is the silver platter that holds the golden apple of freedom and liberty, which was defined in the Declaration of Independence. And so before the Supreme Court started dismantling the rights of the people in cases like Dobbs, it was attacking democracy itself. In the Citizens United decision in 2010, the Roberts Court transformed every corporate treasury in America into a political slush fund, saying that CEOs have the right to spend whatever money they want from the corporate treasury in political campaigns. And that radically changed our concept of what a corporation is, and it bulldozed the wall of separation between corporate treasuries and public elections. In 2013, in Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court cut the heart out of the Voting Rights Act. And we have not recovered from that decision. In 2014, in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, the Supreme Court basically gave corporations not just the political rights of the people, but also the religious freedoms of the people, saying that private corporate employers could exercise their rights of religious conscience, as if a corporation has a religious conscience, and decide not to offer contraceptive health care to their employees. So the cases just go on. And of course, we know about the kinds of corruption that have been tolerated on the Supreme Court. Here in the 8th District, we actually have 3 justices who live here. Chief Justice Roberts lives here in Montgomery County. Brett Kavanaugh lives here, and I think Neil Gorsuch still lives here. So they represent and serve us the same way that we represent and serve them. And they should understand that the American people want there to be a strict code of ethics applying to Supreme Court justices, the exact same code of ethics that applies to every other judge in the federal system, and all the more so for the Supreme Court. Within the federal judiciary, there is only one category of judges who get the elevated title of justice. We have district court judges, we have appeals court judges, we have magistrates, but it's only those who serve on the Supreme Court who are called justice. And that should guarantee that we are getting a higher level of ethical probity and integrity from them, not a lower level of ethical probity and integrity from them. So we need the Supreme Court to act on its own, to observe the highest ethical standards, and if they won't do it, then Congress needs to intervene, and we need to use our powers to make sure that ethics are respected on the Supreme Court. But in general, we have a Supreme Court that is now returned to an historic baseline of defending inequality and class power and defending the institutions of political white supremacy. So we need to make some dramatic changes in the years ahead, and that's why I'm glad to be a co-sponsor of the Judiciary Act of 2023, and I am looking for any way that we can to move the judiciary back towards a muscular defense of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the civil rights and the civil liberties of the people, as well as the democratic process itself. It is my pleasure now to turn it over to my colleague and my friend, who is the new state senator from District 16, State Senator Ariana Kelly, who is a member of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee and a great champion of the rights and the freedoms of the people. Please welcome Ariana.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me here, and thanks to the Just Majority Coalition for bringing us all together today and invigorating some hope, a belief that we can do better, because the American people do deserve better. I think I'm here today because I believe that the American people deserve an ethical Supreme Court, a court that understands and values the priorities of Americans, and one that really values people more than power. I am in the unenviable position of speaking after Jamie Raskin, who is a brilliant constitutional scholar and a wonderful human being. So what I can add is really just my perspective and what it's been like to be a state legislator working in this time with this Supreme Court today. State legislators like myself live in fear about what the Supreme Court might do. It wasn't just the Dobbs decision, although that was like a punch in the gut. It's also been decisions on gun safety and other issues, particularly issues that are most important to women. And honestly, I think that we deserve better. We can do better. I'm just a regular person. I'm a mom of 4. I'm a former journalist. When I'm not in the state Senate, I work in a health clinic that serves a low-income community. I can tell you that confidence in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low, right? We know that about 25% of people espouse confidence in the Supreme Court right now. It's clear to regular, everyday people like me that the court is broken and something needs to change, clear as day. I think the court is experiencing a crisis of legitimacy and lack of confidence in the court. And the congressman mentioned this, but really, and I hate saying this, it's not just because they're conservative, it's because some of them are corrupt, right? These are, as the congressman mentioned, some people in the court are my neighbors. I don't want to say that, but people deserve the truth, and I know the truth is that we can do better. I represent Montgomery County and Annapolis. I've been there working really hard to reduce health disparities and improve maternal health and promote economic security for families. And the work that I do is the work I was sent to Annapolis to do by my constituents. And this court is really, in many ways, preventing us from doing that. When I read the Dobbs decision, which I did today, and I wish I didn't, honestly, it made me so mad. I hadn't read it since a year ago, almost a year ago, and it made me furious just to see sort of, I'm tapping into some real feelings here. We're going to hear from Planned Parenthood and Pro-Choice Maryland, but from my perspective, I just want to say that this attack on women's rights is just a tactic, right, to ensure permanent power for these conservative special interests. And based on my experience working in politics, most Republicans don't even believe this stuff, but they're going about it to maintain power over what I think are largely economic issues. I think the American people deserve better. So I am excited to be here today to elevate this issue, to remind people that Dobbs decision in particular was terrible, not just for women's health, but especially for women of color. Nearly 60% of black women live in states that have passed or will pass abortion bans. This is really important. A majority of Americans are pro-choice, and 43 states have a majority of pro-choice Americans in them, but the court's decision just completely ignored that. I have so many other things I want to say, but I'm biting my tongue because I want you guys to hear from the other folks here. But I do want to just really elevate the issue of maternal health, and particularly black maternal health, as we deal with this post-Dobbs world. And just note that, you know, all 5 men on the court voted against abortion rights. And that's not reflective of the men that I know. The men that I know respect women and respect women's rights to control their bodies. And so, to me, it tells me that there's something that needs to change with the court if 100% of the men on the court are in disagreement with that. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Advocates for D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia, Karen Nelson.
Thank you, Senator Kelly, and thank you, Congressman, for inviting Planned Parenthood to be here. Thank you, Just a Majority. It has been a year since the Supreme Court took down Roe v. Wade, and it ended our constitutional right to access abortion care. And I'm here today to talk about why that matters and how a fair and ethical Supreme Court matters. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Planned Parenthood of Maryland's patients, 50,000 of them in D.C. and Maryland alone. These are patients served by this state and D.C. By our organization. I'm here on behalf of the abortion care patients that are traveling from more than 26 different states to receive care here in the state of Maryland. And I'm here on behalf of the abortion providers who work so hard every single day to provide this necessary health care with dignity, ease, and compassion, just like any other aspect of health care. Abortion is health care, and health care is a human right. And our courts really should be protecting and advancing our rights. Our courts are a core part of the democratic system and our institutional norms. And the courts need to be protecting everyone's dignity and equality. But as we've seen time and time again, many are left behind, and many are actively stripped of constitutional rights. Anti-abortion politicians and their allies are using this court to take away the power to control our own bodies and our futures and our livelihoods. Already, the courts have ended the federal constitutional right to abortion. They've eroded access to birth control and other essential health care. And they've called into question the FDA's decades-old approval of the commonly used abortion pill mifepristone. And on top of all of that, they are attacking LGBTQ plus people. We're fighting hard, and our state electeds, like Senator Kelly, are demanding that this is not going to be the case here in Maryland. But why should it be different here in Maryland from other states? Why should health care be available here and not guaranteed elsewhere? Why does your zip code matter when it comes to health care? When really all of this was a constitutional right just a year ago. We don't really have time to waste. We need judges that are committed to fairness and equality to protect our democracy, our rights, and the future of this country. And court reform is essential to restore abortion rights and bolster hard-won civil rights. Again, we don't have time to waste. Every day, we see women and their families traveling out of their home states for health care. And some are just not able to travel. So that means they go without. So for all of them, we have to pull out all the stops. We've got to make things right again. And I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today, and for everyone who is standing up for all who deserves the ability to make their own choices. And now I would like to introduce our friend and our partner, Priya Hay-Chatterjee, who is the VP of Pro-Choice Maryland.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon. My name is Priya Hay-Chatterjee, and I'm Vice Chair of Pro-Choice Maryland Action, the grassroots leader of Maryland's movement for reproductive health, rights, and justice. Nearly a year after the Supreme Court of the United States stripped us of our human right to abortion care, the landscape of abortion access has become more chaotic, not less. Across the country, abortion funds support as many callers as they can, exhausting their budgets each week and each month and having to turn away those who call after the funds run out. As restrictions have taken hold across the country and for the last decades, Maryland has been uniquely positioned as an access point both for abortion care and now for gender-affirming care. We are the southernmost state with the strongest protections and shielding of these types of care. We are responsible not only for ourselves, but also for those who find refuge within our borders, receiving compassionate, affirming care that they cannot receive back home. And we are proud and grateful to be able to do so. But it shouldn't have to be this way. We shouldn't have to live in fear, questioning every decision day whether the powers that be will affirm our human rights, whether those entrusted with the fate of the nation will answer to donors, to party, to religion, or to the people. We are at an inflection point. The court's decisions don't just impact us, they impact the fate of our planet and everyone who lives on it. Our generation is reckoning with a future in which we have no reproductive freedom. We're not just planning for the families we want, we're planning for the world our children will live in. We have been forced to decide if we will not have children, or if we'll have children who can't play outside because the air outdoors is too saturated with pollution. This is the future that we are looking at if the Supreme Court is unable to protect our planet when climate change comes up. For much of the global south, that future is already here. The court will dictate how we respond or don't respond to the climate catastrophe. So we cannot settle for a patchwork of reproductive freedom. We cannot settle for just a few human rights here and there. We can't settle for a court that only sometimes thinks about what's best for the people. This inflection point necessitates action. It's time to expand the court so that it is no longer so wildly out of step with human rights, civil rights, and its own precedent. It's time to expand the court for reproductive health, rights, and justice, and for a more just future. And now I'd like to introduce Karen Finney, a fellow reproductive rights advocate.
Thank you. I'm also honored to be a member of End Citizens United and a former board member of NARAL Pro-Choice America. And I'm a little taller, so I'm going to do this. So I want to start by noting that today is one day after Juneteenth, Freedom Day. And that's a day that serves both as a symbol of freedom and a reminder of the responsibility that every generation has as to protect our democracy. It's obviously also the anniversary of the Dobbs decision, and that was a decision that not only overturned Roe v. Wade, but it basically stripped women of the fundamental right to control our bodies and said that we're less than in this democracy. And as a black woman, these anniversaries remind me of the struggles of women, and black women in particular, and my ancestors who fought from slavery to segregation to the Supreme Court for the right to control our bodies and our freedom and to participate in our democracy. It reminds me of a time when our bodies were treated as property, and we were told we were less than and we could not be trusted with freedom. And I remember the black women who have come before me who have echoed this cry for generations. So we stand here right now, as you've heard, at a time when our democracy is being undermined by a Supreme Court that is over-politicized and that is facing its lowest support from the public in as long as any of us can remember, as well as a culture of corruption that seems to have really taken root. And justices who believe they're not accountable to the Constitution or to any of us, we the American people. How can we have confidence in a Supreme Court that says We don't need ethics rules that says conservative mega donors can work to make the law work for them while stripping away our fundamental rights, or that guns have more rights than our children. The right to control and make decisions about our bodies is fundamental to freedom. It is fundamental to democracy. It is the essence of what freedom is. I want to echo the words of our vice president from a year ago. How dare they? As this fight for reproductive freedom continues, our fight to reform our court also must continue. Obviously, here in Maryland, they've taken incredible steps to protect women, but I want everyone in Maryland to know, and everyone who's listening, we also have a responsibility as stewards of our democracy to protect and expand and reform our Supreme Court. That means we have to say to our members of Congress, you heard from Congressman Raskin about the legislation that's currently in Congress. We have something that we can do as stewards of democracy to make sure members of Congress know that we support efforts to reform the court, to make it more just, to make it live up to the promise of our democracy. And that's what we're here to do. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, you have power to help make change and to protect our Supreme Court. Thank you.
All right, and so we're going to take questions from the media, if there are any questions.
Yes, the bus has been all over, starting in Boston. I personally have been to Detroit and Dallas. It's been to Austin, been to, I want to say, Houston, also throughout California, Sacramento, the Bay Area, the San Diego area, again, throughout Texas, and now we're here. And the goal at each stop is to raise awareness with this broad coalition, and again, to make people aware that there is something that we can do. We don't have to just stand by and let people take control of our court.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have very high hopes that the GOP majority in the House will bring this up for consideration. But it's very important to begin the public educational process now. The Constitution itself does not define the number of justices that are on the Supreme Court. There have been at least 9 different changes in the numbers on the Supreme Court. And this current Supreme Court is illegitimate in a lot of different ways. One is that it is the product of real gerrymandering. My constituent, our neighbor, Merrick Garland, who's now the Attorney General of the United States, was the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. And he was nominated to the Supreme Court in February of 2016 by President Obama. And Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate said they would not only not have a vote on his nomination, they would not even have a hearing on his nomination. And he may have been the single most qualified person ever nominated to the Supreme Court, having been the chief judge on the D.C. Circuit for many years. And so he never had a hearing. He never had a vote. And yet, and the theory behind it was that 11 months before the election was too close to the next presidential election. Well, what do you know? In 2020, when we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just a couple of months before the end of Trump's tenure, Mitch McConnell barreled through the Senate the nomination of Mrs. Waterford, Amy Coney Barrett. And this is despite the fact that they had said that a year was too close to the election. And then just a couple of months before the election, when voting had actually started in certain states, they proceeded to confirm Amy Coney Barrett. So there's a lot of illegitimacy in these opinions. There is little logical integrity to the opinions. As we know from Dobbs, there was no precedential authority for it. It was an absolute U-turn from the Supreme Court's elaboration of a constitutional right to privacy that had begun in Griswold versus Connecticut and that was expressed in Roe versus Wade and reaffirmed in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. But the court didn't care. They basically took the position that they had enough justices on the court at that point just to wipe out a right that millions and millions of Americans had come to rely upon. So there's a fundamental cloud of illegitimacy that hangs over this court, and we need to restore the legitimacy of the court by engaging in legislation that will shore up its integrity. And so we need to be talking about increasing the numbers and other things that we can do to make sure that we don't get another runaway court like this. No, yeah. Well, you ask an excellent question because I'm one of the last Democratic colleagues to get aboard this legislation. I was not among the first. And you got to understand, I fell out of love with the Supreme Court a long time ago. I'm a professor of constitutional law. And remember, for the vast majority of American history, the Supreme Court has been a profoundly conservative and indeed reactionary institution. I mean, if you look at the beginning of the Republic, through the Civil War, the Supreme Court did nothing to aid the most vulnerable and downtrodden group of people in the country, the enslaved Americans. And in the Dred Scott decision, all the Supreme Court did was to cement into place slavery as a system, saying that African Americans had no rights that the white man was bound to respect. And then even after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment in 1896 in Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court gutted the meaning of the Reconstruction Constitution and upheld separate but equal and Jim Crow apartheid in America. So it wasn't really until the white primary cases, Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, Roe versus Wade, it wasn't until the Warren Court came along that the Supreme Court was briefly aligned with the real rights and freedoms and interests of the people. And then, of course, that was undone with the Burger Court and the Rehnquist Court and the Roberts Court. So there's been this retreat to the historic baseline of a reactionary jurisprudence. And, you know, I was not convinced that changing the numbers would necessarily be the right way for us to proceed. But at this point, I don't see anything else that will work because of the gerrymandering of the court and the Machiavellian manipulation of jurisprudence in the country. But the Supreme Court is in one place, and the vast majority of the American people are in a completely different place in terms of defending voting rights, in terms of defending free and fair elections, in terms of defending democracy, in terms of defending reproductive freedom, in terms of defending all of the rights and liberties that are contained in the Bill of Rights. All right, it looks like that's it. Thank you all for coming.